I am very excited to introduce to you all today's speaker, Forrest Knight. Forrest has spent a number of years writing software as both an engineer and a software consultant at multiple Fortune 500 companies before joining Lightstep as a sales engineer. Forrest has joined this space after seeing how Lightstep could uniquely solve many of the problems he personally encountered deploying software at scale. And one of my favorite things about Forrest is he does breakdancing on the side, which is so cool and so unique and something I can never do. So with that, I give you Forrest Knight.
Thanks, Kelly. You snuck that last part in there. I am a dancer. I care a ton about observability as well. And one of my favorite things about being in this role now is over the last 2 years here at Lightstep, I've spoken with literally hundreds of engineers, SREs, people in the C-suite, CIOs, CTOs, and everybody who cares about software performance, delivery, things like that. And really every day I spend every day helping people understand how to achieve these things. And I've heard many different perspectives. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'll share my screen. And really the context of that, why I say that, by the way, is kind of just to show you, I guess I've kind of seen it all, and people are really coming at this from many different places of maturity and perspectives. I like to think of SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs kind of as a pyramid. They depend on each other. You can have some, you can't really have some without the others. But let's just talk about that. So at the bottom of our pyramid are SLAs. These are just service level agreements. These are really just the contracts that are happening, right? So if I'm a business, and it could be any business, right? I have my customers can be another business, a counter business, right? Business to business agreements, or it could be a consumer. And basically I'm offering some service, you pay me money, that's our agreement. There can be carve outs for what happens if I don't deliver that service, right? In the enterprise space, but we'll touch more on that in a second. SLOs, this is kind of the new kid on the block, though. We've been doing this for a while. I think it's just reached a new level of maturity, really. But SLO stands for service level objective. These should track pretty closely to your SLAs. These are really the ways that us folks in IT engineering enable our SLAs. So oftentimes it should be pretty clear, how our SLO maps to some part of our SLA. And then SLIs, most companies have these. These are just service level indicators. These are all the dashboards, graphs, heuristics that we're looking at day to day. So again, highlighting this, most companies have SLIs and SLAs, and I would say in a tangible form, right? So in order to sell, you have to have some type of agreement in place. So there's your SLA, and then you're monitoring your software performance in some way. You might be doing that poorly, you might be doing that very well, but you are monitoring your software performance. SLOs, people are doing this and they have been doing this, but they haven't been doing it in a tangible way. That's really easy to track. This can look like quarter over quarter reporting. How did we do over last quarter? A bunch of people will go and do some auditing and kind of figure out, what their SLOs were. Moving on. So what does an SLA alert look like? We're going to move through each one of these. I kind of want to highlight here kind of the difference between SLAs, SLOs, and where engineering folks and business folks kind of need to meet and where the gap is today. So an SLA alert is a user not being able to log in. If I am providing some API as a service and our customers are maybe some other enterprise, our API is down, they'll call in and say, hey, your API isn't working. It hasn't worked over the last 48 hours. And due to the contractual obligations, we're going to require, basically a kickback, or we basically want our money back for the lost business. These are bad. These result in account churn. What that means for people not in the sales side is basically your customer stops being your customer, right? You lose users. If we think of kind of the example I'm going to use throughout this presentation. Let's just say that I own a streaming platform, right? People can log in to our service. If users are consistently not able to log in and watch the shows that they want to watch on our streaming platform, that's a breaking of the level of service that they expect, and they will discontinue business with us. Ultimately, these get funneled back to engineering, right? A customer phone call of not being able to log in turns into a slew of technical issues, but one kind of comes before the other. Did I skip a slide there? I did, actually. I did double click there. So service level agreement, again, these are just contracts. These include all of the language around what service we're getting, when it will be provided, how much we're going to pay for it, professional services, what will happen if we don't deliver that service. And very often, us on the engineering side of the house, right, aren't really aware of what are in these contracts, but we are responsible for maintaining the software that ultimately enables the delivery of this service that us folks in sales are agreeing to sell, right, or offering. So an important delineation there. That's really what an SLA is. Talking about service level indicators, these are just heuristics about software, right? So these are statistical data coming out of our applications, things like how much memory is being used, what is the latency of some endpoint, memory, all of the big shiny dashboards that we've really have had for a long amount of time. We graph these typically over time. We alert off of these. Pretty standard stuff. I would say most people, going back, maybe have not called these SLIs, but in today's kind of semantic, that's really what an SLI is. These are just two snippets from Lightstep. Actually, some of the graphs in there on the left, we have some infrastructure metrics, and then on the right, we're looking at response times of some endpoint. There are many different tools that do these types of things. What does an SLI alert look like then? The latency for some endpoint, say API user image, has went above some threshold. It's increased by 30%, right? Or memory utilization for some service is at 90%, right? Above that threshold. The error rate of some particular function, transaction, or whatever is now above 8%. So again, kind of standard alerting things, often not contextualized, right? And so the big difference between an SLI and what we're looking at is we can almost think of these as looking at individual gauges, right? If we think of like something like a car, how hot is our engine? How fast are we going? What is the current temperature outside? What is the wind direction? These are SLIs. They're not contextual. We can graph them over time, right? How fast were we going at 8 a.m. versus how fast were we going at 1 a.m., et cetera, et cetera. Same thing for service. If we have an authentication service, how many transactions are we processing at 1 minute in the day versus another minute in the day? What is the response time? Things like that. And here is kind of the more hairy one, the newer kid on the block, service level objectives. So service level objectives should track very closely to an SLA. And these are much more contextual, right? These are thinking about service delivery and framing really software performance or application performance in the context of some core, probably business transaction, or thinking about availability, things like that. So this is actually a snippet out of Lightstep and what we call a stream. This is a graph of performance of a service, a particular operation, but now sliced by some customer. And the reason that's useful is we might have an agreement with that customer that specifically for this customer, right? And every customer would have their own agreement that the response time or the performance of this application will be X, Y, or Z, right? So we're not just looking at the performance of a thing, we're looking at the performance relative to some agreement that we have with a customer. This could be an external customer, right? This could be an internal customer. Those are also valid customers, and we use the word customer. If you're at a very big organization, it's not uncommon for you to have SLAs with customers who are just other teams in your organization, and those are just as important. Availability, again, if your customer is internal, just as important. And so people aren't asking, hey, is the service up? Now I need to know, is the service performing to the degree that I can use it for my business, right? And that's really what service level objective is aiming to measure. So these are taking things like SLAs, which are immeasurable, looking at our software as an entire platform, whether it's cutting across key customer transactions, and then measuring those things. And then when we're having conversations with our customers, we can actually show how we were actually meeting the things that we agreed to meet. So what does an SLO-based alert look like? So our uptime last month dropped from 99% down to 95%. Big question, right? So on the surface, it seems simple, but being able to say that our uptime, if you are delivering an application made up of 55 services, uptime probably has its own hairy definition. Being from 99% to 95% then requires having heuristics from all of these different services over the last month and measuring those and thinking about, what, again, uptime actually means, right? So is that users being able to log in and do, 1 through 9 of the things out of 10 things? Is it being able to do all things? These are the types of answers or problems that we're trying to solve with SLOs and be able to measure very accurately and very closely, so that when customers come to us and are asking us questions about availability, we have hard facts that show what our system was actually doing, right? Not just saying that an application was on or not on or up or down. We can actually show how we're delivering that solution. Error budgets also fall in SLOs. So now that we know how a critical transaction is performing over 30 days or 7 days or whatever that time window is, we can do cool things like error budgets. We can say the login flow has exceeded its error budget by 5%. And this really gets into why these are so powerful, why you need SLIs in the first place, accurate SLIs that enable your SLOs. From SLOs, you can talk about error budgets, whether you're doing these in a tool or measuring these yourself. This really enables us to more accurately utilize our engineering time, right? And so if we know that we want to give some user paths or transactions wiggle room to have errors versus others because they're critical or non-critical, being able to measure these things via SLOs becomes very important. So how do we actually do this? SLIs being heuristics, right? We have those. SLAs being the agreements. Most of us in engineering on the IT side don't really know what our SLAs are, though, unless you're close to those teams or maybe you're at a smaller organization. And then people are really doing SLOs ad hoc as it is today, but SLOs are reaching a new level of maturity kind of in this space. You need contextual telemetry. Distributed tracing is really what we mean by that. OpenTelemetry is an open source project that enables contextual telemetry. And the reason why I think that this is so important when we talk about even just SLIs in that pyramid is being able to have telemetry, good data in the first place is going to enable everything else to happen after the fact, right? So if you don't have contextual measurements, you're going to spend a ton of cycles trying to connect the dots. So OpenTelemetry, again, and distributed tracing are just ways where we can measure performance always in the context of everything else that is happening in our system. So instead of just looking at discrete data points, and we can say this happened at this time. We can always ask, what was the system doing at this time? And we have, traces and data really that is always connected to everything else in the system. So that's really step one, get acquainted with OpenTelemetry. If that's not something you're familiar with today, highly encourage you to check it out, get started with that. What is the results of this? So why this is so important, I've touched on this throughout this, is I'll reiterate kind of this in an example, right? So if we're at an organization, we have 120 services, which isn't uncommon for, let's say a mid-sized company, and users are not able to log in. There can be any number of reasons, literally hundreds of permutations of events why someone might not be able to log in. If you have a, service is owned by a team kind of approach to your software delivery. So every service has a team that owns it, or a team probably owns a set of services. You end up reaching out to a ton of different teams. If we have, contextual telemetry data in the first place and SLIs, then we can really narrow down the number of people to just the authentication team in this case, right? And this could be any number of more complex problems, right? The inability to deliver images on a page, or the inability for a user to check out, right? There could be any number of reasons why these things fail, and we can cut that down significantly. We can also do telemetry-driven decision-making. So if I have 100 engineers in my organization, I am the CTO, we have a set of business metrics that we want to achieve next year. We have a set of problems that exist today, and we need to know how we can meet our current contractual obligations and also develop the cool new stuff. This is the perpetual problem that every engineering organization faces. There's technical debt, and there are also new things that we need to make to get new dollars. And us engineers are really at the task level of just working on these things, right? But us engineers can also be enabled if we're adopting the correct tooling to be a part of this conversation and provide data that is much more meaningful than their service was up or down. We can instead say, okay, this critical path was operating at, under its air budget over the last 30 days and 6 months. I don't think we need to invest too much engineering time in that. We can actually focus more time on these new cool things. If you don't have that, if you're just looking at, kind of how noisy certain customers are versus others, and kind of using that as your data points, you kind of lose the fidelity of detail that allows you to make these better investments. And honestly, I think just have confidence in those decisions as well. How are we doing on time? Not too bad. Okay. So some frequently asked questions. How do we get started? Again, OpenTelemetry, that's the second data point there as well. You do need good telemetry data. This all starts with telemetry, whatever type of data you have. That would be my recommendation. It's something that we use. It's becoming a standard in this industry. And it really is a good way to future-proof really just generating telemetry from your services in general. What's really awesome about OpenTelemetry is because it is becoming such an adopted standard, even third-party services, right? So if you're depending on a provider, and if they adopt it as well, then we can trace through and have observability through not just our services that we're deploying, but also services that we're depending on. And that's kind of the cool aspirational state, in my mind, at least, of that project. The second/third one here is, do engineers need to know what the company is contractually obligated to deliver for SLOs to work? This is a hairy one. I think that the engineering organization needs to be focused on providing more contextual telemetry so that we have good data. But I don't necessarily think that in order for you to have good SLOs, that you need to know what is in each customer's contract. If you have good data, it becomes pretty easy to actually see how you're delivering software to who, how software is performing for each customer for critical workflows. But if you only have something like the checkout service works 80% of the time, but you don't have any context around that, who it's failing for, why it's failing, when it's failing, the fact that it's only failing for people in this region or any of the other number of reasons, you lose a lot of the valuable insights that could be had there. So I will open it up for questions. Kelly, I guess you want to moderate, tell me what we have here.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So thanks so much, Forrest. That was an awesome presentation. And like Forrest said, we're going to start our Q&A session. So if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for. So while everyone is entering their questions, I'm going to start with my own question, which how does Lightstep do all of these things that you talked about?
Yeah, so we started really as a commercial trace analysis platform, right, / observability platform. But when we talk about contextual data, traces are that contextual data. A trace is just a distributed log, and it's like the highest ROI on a single data point, in my opinion. Everything's already connected, and we're analyzing those things at scale, basically. So we do SLIs, SLOs. We have something called streams, which allows you to really slice across your data and see performance. Really think of it at the transaction level. You could think of it as a workflow level. But like I showed earlier, instead of just looking at the latency of some endpoint, I could say, show me the latency of this endpoint for users in this region on this version of this service when they're doing, this particular workflow, right? So, and we could track that over time. So these are things that we've been thinking about for a while. SLAs on the other side, that workflow is probably a call center. So that's not something that we do today. We're in the observability space, but there are tons of tools I think people are familiar with actually handling your SLA alerts. That's what I mean by that, of what happens when we're not meeting our contractual obligations, that type of tracking. It's kind of outside of our domain.
Awesome. Okay, so next one is, how do you determine SLOs? I know you talked a little bit about how this is it's a newer concept to our space. So how do you determine it? And then how do you get teams on board with implementing SLOs?
Yeah, I think the reason SLOs are becoming popular is due to the concept of air budgets and this idea that we can basically allocate engineering resources based off of these budgets that we've determined. I think it's a really complicated thing to solve for, to be honest. But we are hitting kind of a new level of maturity. So I think, how do we do? What was the question? How do we do it today, or how do we get started?
Or how do you determine? How do we determine? Yeah,
that's something that should be happening at the team lead, or I would say almost management to business side level, in my mind. But it's a big gray area, right? So you're going to have software that I'm delivering to internal customers, and that's going to be a much more technical SLO. Then we're going to have our broader SLOs that we're kind of meeting at the organization, probably up to our C-suite level. So there's more gray to it than I've kind of defined here in this presentation, but you really need to have a good idea of what can you actually measure in terms of key workflows, availability, and that's where you get started. But it's going to depend on who your customer is, I would say, more than anything else. And there's a whole slew of customers, internal and external.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna throw one more question at you. We talked a little bit about open telemetry. Can you just expand on that a little bit more and maybe offer some advice on getting to know this better and how people should get started with open telemetry?
Definitely. So we are on the board of that project, you can go to hotel.lightstep.com. There's some getting started guides, technical guides. Pretty easy to get started. Think of like an agent or automatic instrumentation library. If you have modern services, it's pretty easy to get started. You can go to the hotel repos themselves. And if there's any, less technical folks here, again, OpenTelemetry is just a standard that is being widely adopted, and kind of the benefit there is that you're not locked into any vendor, right? So we use it. When you send your data to us, you're not locked into us. And you have this kind of standard set of telemetry and insights that you can send to anyone. But yeah, hotel.lightstep.com to get started.
Very cool. We have one more question that just came in here. I'm just going to ask you. So OpenTelemetry has a very stable tracing API. What are your thoughts on the metrics API to send data to Lightstep?
Yeah, so you can send OTLP metrics to us today. We do accept that either from the application or through the collector. If you're familiar with the project, which it sounds like you are, we'll always support whatever version of telemetry is coming out of that project. So we have people sending us production metrics today. But yeah, I mean, that it's not 1.0, but it's getting there. Knock on wood, I don't anticipate too many breaking changes. There's a lot of finer details to be worked out, but we'll always support it. Like I said, we're hand in hand with OpenTelemetry. So if you do want to send us those metrics, if it changes, we'll support those changes as well.
Sweet. All right, well, we are at the end of our time. Forrest, if you'd like to add anything else, including how people can reach you, now would be the time to do it.
Yeah, thanks for your time today. And there's a lot of things you'd be doing, so thank you for doing this. If you want to email me directly, you can be reached at forrest@lightstep.com. Check out our YouTube channel. That's it.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Hope you found this information to be valuable. You can find out more information at lightstep.com. Other than that, hope you have a great rest of your day.